A former CIA intelligence officer is sharing his struggles with a mysterious illness that first affected federal employees stationed in Cuba in 2016. The U.S. Embassy staff there complained of symptoms consistent with so-called Havana Syndrome. Those include headaches, fatigue, and cognitive difficulties. There have been at least 130 suspected cases. Some go back over a decade, and there has been a recent spike in cases since initial reports. And CBS News has learned that they often occur near active Russian operations. Catherine Herridge takes a closer look.
This is an act of war against U.S. officials.
A seasoned CIA officer, Mark Polymeropoulos ran clandestine operations across Europe and Asia. So when he traveled to Moscow in 2017, the watching eyes of Russian intelligence did not faze him.
Even in my hotel room, I'd go to the gym and a guy in a black trench coat comes down and checks on me down there. And so not unexpected, part of the job.
Then in his hotel room, the trip took a dangerous turn.
I woke up in the middle of the night because I had this incredible case of vertigo. It felt almost as if I was in some kind of, carnival ride. And I'll tell you, Catherine, I'd spent years in war zones of Iraq and Afghanistan. I'd put my life on the line. This was the most terrifying experience of my life. I had no control.
Back in the U.S., Mark reported to the CIA medical office.
I said, is this consistent with Havana Syndrome? And their answer was no.
Havana Syndrome is the name given to a mysterious neurological condition, first reported by State Department personnel in Cuba 5 years ago, who experienced a similar set of symptoms.
Pressure in the head.
Yes.
Loss of balance.
Yes.
Ringing in the ears.
Yes. I mean, I've had a headache for 3 years. It feels like a vice clamp down here, and then there's pressure that comes over the top of my head.
Mark says it took 3 years to get help at the Walter Reed Military Hospital.
They diagnosed me with a traumatic brain injury. It's on paper. I have it. I was there when he did this, but he actually takes the paint and he throws it against the canvas.
Mark's CIA colleague, who was also affected, painted this picture called The Gunshot during their Walter Reed art therapy sessions.
This is the invisible wound that, no one believed us for a long time.
The National Academies of Sciences recently found the most plausible explanation was pulsed radio frequency energy. There are no public images of the alleged device. A knowledgeable source told CBS News the technology behind this Russian-made microwave generator from the 90s is likely similar to today's smaller mobile units. In recent months, 2 suspected cases were reported near the White House.
This is clearly an escalation.
Republican Senator Susan Collins authored legislation that gets victims medical and financial support.
This bill will provide much-needed assistance to the employees of the intelligence community, the State Department, and other federal agencies.
In a moment of rare bipartisanship, the Senate passed the bill unanimously last week.
Is Russia responsible?
Russia is certainly a likely suspect. President Biden should send an unmistakable message to the Russians that if they are behind these attacks, they must stop them immediately. We have to have full cooperation from the Russians, or they must be made to pay a price.
Still unable to concentrate for more than a few hours at a time, Mark made the hard decision to retire from the agency he loves.
Who feels safe to serve now overseas with this happening? My contention is it's the Russians, but whatever adversary is doing this certainly has not seen anything from the U.S. government that's telling them to stop.
So Catherine Herridge is joining us now from Washington to talk more about this story. Catherine, you spoke to Professor David Relman, the chairman of the National Academies of Sciences Committee, which is investigating the Havana Syndrome and the potential technology. You talked to him about the potential technology being used in these attacks. I want to play a little of that sound.
So in its simplest terms, is this mechanism crude, or does it have to be pretty sophisticated to injure somebody?
So you're right. Not just any pulsed microwave energy would be expected to cause these kinds of health effects. Why? Because if the frequency is too high, it doesn't penetrate the skull and instead just causes heating of the skin, burning. and these people didn't feel burning. On the other hand, if the frequency is low, it goes right through the head. So you have got to adjust these, these various features of the energy so that it gets into the head, doesn't go completely through, and also sets up these little pressure waves.
You know what I also thought, Catherine, is obviously it's only affecting people in these specific locations. So, the technology has the ability to zoom in, for lack of a better word, on certain people as opposed to, affecting people who may be walking on the street or you maybe work at a coffee shop next door or something like that. What more did you learn from Dr. Relman about the technology behind these direct energy attacks?
Well, the key word there, Anne-Marie, is directed energy attacks. And based on our reporting here at CBS News, what we learned is that it really takes a special energy recipe to cause the kind of lasting brain damage in U.S. personnel that they're seeing among people at the CIA, the State Department, and the Defense Department. It's not a situation where you can just rock up to a location with a very small device and flip the on switch. It has to be exactly calibrated or you won't get the effect that Professor Relman described. You'll get what amounts to a near miss. You'll have burning skin, or the energy will go through one side of the skull and out the other. It won't be that perfect frequency, sort of fine tuning that sets up this wave effect in the brain that they believe is what causes these really debilitating effects.
So, Catherine, Dr. Relman also spoke to you about what this directed energy is and what it does to the brain. Let me play some of that sound.
There are some scientists here in the United States that spoke to us about how pulsed radiofrequency energy affects cells, even in the brain. What it does is, when these pulses arrive, it heats up the cell very quickly, but because the pulse is just exceedingly brief, the cell cools down again very quickly. And this rapid heating and cooling creates little pressure waves.
So what more did Professor Relman tell you about directed energy and how it might cause brain damage? I can't imagine what this former CIA operative is going through.
Well, this is really a case where you got to put on your science hat to understand the physics of what's going on. But to break it down in its simplest terms, everything has an energy wave. And the theory is that a device has been created that can completely mimic these energy waves that exist in your brain. And once it's able to do that, it has this pulsing energy, and cells heat up really quickly, and then they cool down really quickly. And that sets up another wave effect that bounces off inside the bone of your skull. So it's almost like what one scientist described to us as an immaculate concussion. You can't see that it happened, but you know that there is lasting brain damage as a result.
Man, this is like ripped from the pages of some sci-fi, story. Gosh, I'm remembering, and Vlad, you're all sort of into the sci-fi stuff, but I just sort of have images of the Star Trek crew, beaming down and getting hit by this invisible wave and not knowing what it is, and it almost seems so similar. Last week, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the U.S. is, at this point, still does not know who is causing these incidents. Obviously, there are fingers being pointed at Russia. Senator Collins said Russia is the likely suspect. Is the U.S. looking at any other countries, though? And how is the government tracking these events?
Well, officially, the U.S. government is looking at a number of entities, but privately, the country that you hear the most is Russian intelligence, in part because we know through our reporting and declassified records that Russia has really been a pioneer in this directed energy microwave devices. We have an image of one of these devices that was created in the 90s. You see it there. It's very large and it's very crude looking. But what we know now is that the technology behind smaller models, which we understand to be about the size of a desktop scanner, is really identical to those older versions. So on the one hand, you have all of this intelligence that points to Russia. We know through our reporting that many of the Defense Department employees who were affected, it happened near active Russian operations. And then you add to that that the Russians have really been pioneering this technology for decades. And to be clear, we know of some cases that go back 20 years. So it's the spike or the cluster of recent cases which certainly has everybody's attention and a real sense of urgency within the U.S. government.
Man, Catherine, your reporting is just, this has been such a fascinating story, and I really feel for, the former Yeah, it's been fascinating, and I really feel for the former diplomat who found himself, subjected to this and had to spend years suffering and convincing some of sort of the top doctors in this country that this is legitimate. And I hope he finds some peace and some kind of relief.
And that the
Catherine,
president gets some answers when he meets with President Putin this week.
Yeah,
That's right.
That would be nice too. So thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.